Every bodybuilder is unique. That is why, in order to be a master bodybuilder, you have to learn the art of instinctive training. You have to know exactly how to finely arrange your routines and methods to bring out the best that's in you. And you can only do that if you understand all the Weider principles. They've been created to take you from the beginning stages to the intermediate stages and to the advanced stages of training, carefully, avoiding injury and avoiding pain. By mastering these techniques, these principles, you will become a master bodybuilder, know exactly what to do, exactly when to apply it in order to get the most out of your training.
The Weider system is really a compilation of all of the different factors that take place in a gym for exercise that affects the body. And these different principles compiled are sort of the indexing of how to systematically approach the principles involved in weight training.
When you first start bodybuilding training, all you have to do is stick to the basics and you'll get plenty of results. But the more advanced your physique becomes, the harder it is to see any further progress. This is called the law of diminishing returns. So, if you're already working as hard as you can, simply trying harder isn't going to get you anywhere. This approach only leads to overtraining and potential injury.
Instead, you need to train more effectively to figure out ways of getting more results from the same amount of effort. You need to learn to employ as many advanced training principles as possible.
Inventors are always trying to come up with new exercise devices that will increase the response of the body to exercise. However, what has allowed modern bodybuilders to develop such fantastic physiques in the past several decades is the realization that the real advances are to be found in the software. That is, exercise technique rather than the hardware. These advanced training techniques, the best examples of which are Joe Weider's intensity training principles, operate like a super efficient computer program which stimulates the maximum response possible from the muscles of the human body. In Tape 2, we dealt with the variety of basic bodybuilding techniques, including how progressive resistance training really works, how to organize your workouts into reps and sets, how to use variations of the split system to increase training intensity, why free weights should form the basis of your bodybuilding training, as well as a variety of other specific training principles designed to help you get the most out of your bodybuilding workouts. In Tape 7, we explained the basic principles involved in training for mass and power, such as the need to train with heavy weights, how long to rest between sets, what exercises to use to develop maximum size and strength, how to generate power using compensatory acceleration training, and how to cycle your workouts to gain maximum development with the minimum risk of injury. In this tape, we will be examining a variety of basic, intermediate, and advanced Weider intensity training principles. Some of these principles involve basic muscle function and should become a part of every one of your workouts. Others involve training techniques that you'll find you use only occasionally in your overall training program. But as the law of diminishing returns teaches us, if you keep doing the same thing in your workouts day after day, week after week, without sufficient variety in your training program, without finding ways to increase the intensity of your training so that you force your muscles to respond, you'll begin to get less and less results from the time you spend in the gym. You can only increase training intensity so far by lifting heavier or doing more sets and reps. At that point, something more is necessary in order to get the kind of muscular development for which you're working so hard. That's when you need the Weider intensity training principles, the most effective set of training guidelines ever devised, which you'll find described in this tape. range of motion involves training a muscle from a position of full extension continuously through to a position of full peak contraction and back again. With certain exceptions, such as power training, for example, this is how to ensure the fullest possible development of the entire muscle.
The principle behind isolation training is that you are working different elements in different areas of the body, and you want to work them as efficiently as possible. The isolation type movements are movements that tend to affect a muscle directly without a secondary muscle involved. In other words, when you're doing a pressing movement with the chest, the primary movement is going to go to the chest, but you're going to have a secondary movement involved with the tricep and also with the deltoid. Now, an isolation movement for the chest would be one that brings the arm across the body, a squeezing type of movement, where you are taking out the secondary type of movements. What we need to do is combine routines that are made up of compound and isolation type of movements to get the full benefit.
You achieve continuous tension by feeling the resistance of the weight continuously and smoothly throughout the entire range of motion during the negative as well as the positive part of the repetition, lifting and lowering the weight without jerking or dropping it or using inertia to help you swing it up.
When you're training, for example, if you're doing bent over rows, throughout the movement, you keep the tension on that body part, so you never really lock out, because a lot of times when you lock out, you know, you can stay in that position for quite some time. There's no pain there. So what you want to do is keep the tension on that body part.
The point of peak contraction in a repetition is when you are at full contraction in an exercise and then make a special effort to crunch and flex the muscle, holding it in this position for a moment to achieve as full and intense a contraction as possible. The peak contraction technique is most useful in doing one-joint isolation exercises, such as triceps extensions, biceps curls, and leg extensions.
Negative repetitions are when you lower the weight at a controlled movement. You don't just bounce the weight or jerk the weight. The movement down is just as important as the movement up. You're hitting the muscle both ways. So say, for example, you see a lot of guys bench pressing. They just bounce the weight and jerk it back up. Always keep it smooth. That downward motion is just as important as pushing it up. It's just as important because it stresses strength and muscular definition in the muscle.
Training to failure isn't the same as training to complete exhaustion. It simply means doing as many reps with a particular weight as you can until you're too tired to continue with any more reps with that weight without stopping to give the muscles involved time to recuperate. Eclectic is a word meaning to borrow from diverse sources. The eclectic principle teaches that to develop a complete bodybuilding physique, you need to use a variety of different approaches to training. Heavy training and quality training, workouts for mass and for detail, two-joint power exercises, and one-joint isolation movements. Priority training involves attacking your weaknesses by training weaker body parts on a priority basis. You do this by training your weaker body parts at the beginning of your workout cycle, when they are fresh and strong, at the beginning of your daily workouts, and of course, by increasing intensity using a variety of other Weider training principles.
I suggest if you have a weakness that you try the Joe Weider priority training principle. If you have weak calves and when you go into the gym and it's, calf day, start with calves. Train them first, blast them. Start with your weak body part. That's the only way it's going to get better. If you start with shoulders or back or whatever, by the time you get to your calves, you're not going to probably put as much into them as you would have if you would have started with them.
If we had a chain and every link can hold 1,000 pounds, but one link can only hold 1 pound, what is the strength of the chain? 1 pound. It breaks at the weak link. So you want to work that weak link or that weak body part first, or at least at the beginning of the workout, so you won't negate it and let it fly by.
When you first begin working out with weights, it makes sense to follow a basic standard program of training until you see how your individual body responds to bodybuilding workouts. But everyone has strong and weak points in their physical makeup. There never has been and probably never will be a champion with an absolutely perfect physique. Some individuals will notice that they've inherited genetic weaknesses. Perhaps certain muscle bellies are too short to be developed easily, or particular muscles are naturally more developed than others. Or as you continue to work out, you'll find that some body parts respond and grow easily, but others seem to resist getting bigger and stronger no matter what you do. In either case, when a weak point develops, you have to make some adjustments to your training, or else your strong points will get stronger and weak points weaker, and you'll never develop that balanced physique you're striving for.
To avoid this, it makes sense to train the muscles on a priority key basis to attack your weaknesses. How is this done? First, you need to train weaker body parts at the beginning of the training cycle when you're the most rested. And you need to train them at the beginning of the daily workout, again, when you're at your strongest. Another way of increasing the response of muscles to training is by giving them unfamiliar movements to do, or forcing them to perform movements in unfamiliar ways. When a muscle gets used to a certain exercise, it tends to respond less than when it's given a new and unfamiliar movement to do. This is why a complete bodybuilding routine involves doing a variety of different exercises for each body part, changing the angles at which the muscles are worked, and using many different intensity principles to force the body to respond in new and unaccustomed ways.
So what we do is we operate in a muscle confusion principle. Really takes into consideration a lot of the other principles in that you are mixing things up. You're doing low repetitions, high repetitions, giant sets, supersets, all these different principles that are just different from one time to the next. And the muscle kind of shakes its head and acts as they're kind of confused.
I'm confused when I'm muscles.
I do use the muscle confusion principle in a way that I may walk into the gym one day and not really know exactly the exercises I'll be doing that day. But to confuse myself, I'll try something a little different. Instead of like the free weights, I'll use maybe a machine instead, and it feels different. Or go to a different gym and do a different exercise also in that way. It just feels different on the body and a different shock.
The only secret I do is I mix it up. And people that look the same and stay the same, it's largely because they have a few favorite exercises and they don't want to change it, and they don't want to listen to anyone, and they don't want to try anything new. And I'm here to tell you that for me, trying things new, training in different gyms, training with different partners, wearing different kind of clothing just to keep things interesting, for me, keeps me coming back for more. And I think by hitting it from every angle with every kind of exercise makes it interesting and it makes it fun, although it's work for me. The only secret really is variety.
Flushing involves forcing as much blood into an area as possible to produce maximum growth. Flushing is really body part training. This is why bodybuilders train each body part individually. When you train forearms, for example, doing several different exercises for this body part alone, one after another, hitting both the flexors and extensors without working any other body parts until you've totally bombed and blasted your forearm muscles, you are using the flushing principle to pump these muscles as full of blood as possible to generate as much growth and development as you can.
I use the Weider cycle training method where if I'm training my legs twice a week, I'll train them heavy the first time and then light the second time. This way I'm able to maintain the size that I have but shape what I have and make it more prettier. So the first day I would do my bulk exercises, which are the squat and the leg press, and on my lighter days I would do my shape exercises like my leg extensions and lunges.
The Weider forced rep principle allows you to do more repetitions per set past the point of failure. For example, if we're doing the barbell curl and we're doing about 8 to 10 repetitions till you can't go anymore, but not resting, that's when you have your partner come in. And he'll give you that extra lift, not doing the exercise for you, but he'll give you the extra lift for a few more reps. And that's why they call it the forced rep.
I myself consider this a very important part of bodybuilding. I notice I make my best gains when I do force reps. I try to envision, I don't put a mental block in my mind where I have a number where I say I have to stop there and I can't do any more. I get to 10, if I can't do any more, my training partner will come in, we'll bang out 5 more, my muscles will be throbbing, the blood will be going to the muscles. It's an incredible rush.
I will ask for some help towards the last 2 weeks because I need to do that extra little bit. I may not be able to do the 15 reps like I should, and I'll need that help.
Force reps is something you should work your way into, though. It's nothing I would jump into because a lot of people are not really familiar with, the proper way of handling the weight and manipulating the weight up for you so you don't get hurt. It's very easy to get injured doing force reps. It's easy to tear a muscle.
The Weider cheating principle involves using other muscles than the primary muscles you're training in an exercise, or using techniques like inertia, swinging the weight up to handle the weight that's a little too heavy for you to lift strictly, or to continue to do more reps at the end of a set when you're starting to get fatigued. For example, if I was doing barbell curls and I was doing 8 to 10 reps, and I wanted to get a few more extra reps, I'd possibly start swinging the weight to get the reps up.
I would do the reps strictly as possible, and then towards the end of the set where I could no longer do the reps in strict form, maybe then I'd use a little bit of cheating technique just to get 1 or 2 more reps out past that point.
When I start to feel the lactic acid in the muscle and feel the burning, I'll continue to push and do maybe 3 repetitions, cheating. So if you don't have a training partner there to assist you in getting the weight up, you cheat by maybe doing a little rock or a little movement to get that weight up.
And also, some exercises, it's not practical for your training partner to use force reps. If you're doing bent over rows with 300 pounds, he's not going to get underneath and give you force reps. So you're going to have to cheat a little bit by pulling with your lower back and your legs just to get 1 or 2 more reps out.
But it's very effective, and it's kind of what you do when you don't have your training partner there.
But I wouldn't use the cheating, from rep 1. I wouldn't do that. I believe in isolating the muscle as much as possible.
Sometimes I like to do partial reps. For example, if I've done a couple of sets with full range motion, I'm really exhausted and I can't do a full range motion anymore. But I still can do like partial reps to exhaust every muscle fiber I got left.
The Burns principle is when you do a complete set, full range of motion, then doing partial repetitions, forcing more blood and oxygen into the muscle.
Once more on each arm. That's it. I'll do 4 short little burns, halfway up. That's it. That's it. Halfway up. That's it. Turn your wrist. That's it. Get the bicep up. Get that peak. That's it. Turn your little finger towards your shoulder. That's it. Once more with this arm, and you're all set. There.
I believe in the drop set system also. That's something where, say I was going to use, say, a 45 or 50-pound side lateral. I would do 10 reps with that movement, and as soon as I was done, I would go right to the 45s and do another, say, 6 reps or as many reps as I can do, and then go on to a lighter weight of, say, 40 or 35 and get as many reps as I can. So you're fully like getting every fiber of that muscle, you know, activated. You're just using a heavier weight. You could still get more activation of that muscle, but you can't do it because you're just not strong enough. So you go to the lighter weight and just keep going on and on. So you really just get that muscle blitzed.
The Weider speed principle, also known as compensatory acceleration, is an important power training technique discussed in greater detail in Tape 7. Compensatory acceleration involves accelerating a weight with an explosive movement rather than lifting it at a specific continuous speed. Explosive movements performed using free weights and relying primarily on two-joint exercises recruit large amounts of white fiber and are ideal for the development of maximum mass and strength.
One of the most valuable Weider principles is the pre-exhaustion principle. Basically, the concept behind this particular principle isn't to overload the muscle where one exercise would not necessarily take it to its full workload. What we're going to do is we're going to combine a single joint exercise along with a two-jointed exercise. For example, if you're working your chest, you would start with, let's say, a fly movement, which would only involve moving the weight across the body, and the only joint movement would be at the shoulder. Now, what that does is it saves the secondary muscles of the triceps and front deltoid, and they still have strength to go. So once you go to exhaustion on the fly, you'd move immediately to a set of, let's say, bench presses, and you would do these presses calling on the fresh secondary strength of the tricep and front deltoid and further exhaust the pec muscles. Now, combining these two exercises together is going to give you a really effective overload and is a valuable principle in the whole realm of the Weider system.
Sometimes I like to use pre-exhaust on larger body parts. For instance, let's take legs. You know, when you're doing squats, if you do squats first in your leg routine, you tend to really reach failure because your lower back's going to be giving way, your lower back's going to be failing, because it's the weakest link in your body when you're squatting. Your lower back's a lot weaker than your legs, so when you're squatting, your lower back's going to give way and you're going to have to stop before you've fully worked your legs. Now, if you was to isolate your quadriceps first with leg extensions and then go into squats afterwards, you'd find that your legs or your quads are giving way first before the lower back because they've been pre-exhausted by the previous isolation exercise. So that's the principle behind that.
Another principle you should use in your training is the Weider staggered set principle. That is, taking a minor muscle group, working it in with a major muscle group, such as training the calves with the chest. Say you're doing chest, you do bench presses. You do a set of bench presses, immediately after that set, stand up, do a set of standing calf raises. Again, go back to the chest area again, doing the bench presses. Then do the calf raises once again. This, in turn, works that calf muscle more than just, say, working it on one separate day during the week. You do the calves because you know the calves is a dense, dense muscle tissue. Along with the calves, you say do the forearms and the trapezius muscles also, because those are very hard muscles to grow, hard muscles to work. So you would incorporate different exercises on different days.
Yeah, I use the rest pause principle in order for my body to adapt to using heavier weights. What I do, I take a basic exercise you know, like a heavy pressing exercise or something like that, for instance, bench press. And I'll get a weight that I can only manage maybe 2 or 3 reps with the weight. I'll do 2 or 3 reps, and I'll put the weight back, I'll put it down, and I'll rest maybe 15 to 20 seconds, something like that. And I'll take the weight again, and I'll do another rep. I'll put the weight back, I'll rest maybe 20, 30 seconds again, and do another rep. And that way, I'm doing a set of, you know, 5 or 6 reps with a weight that I'm not used to, but I'm breaking it down. And that way, you know, get used to handling the heavy weights, and it's a different kind of overload. Again, you know, to shock the body, to make it accommodate, instead of doing the same thing all the time.
There's more to muscle development than fiber size. Muscle mass is also a matter of mitochondrial mass, capillary development, and glycogen storage. Heavy, low-rep training hypertrophies fibers, but higher-rep endurance-type training is what bodybuilders use to develop these other components of muscle size. And including both types of workouts in your bodybuilding program is called holistic training.
The concept behind pyramiding, the pyramiding principle, is the idea of beginning with a warm-up set on a particular exercise, taking one exercise, starting at a lighter level to warm the muscle up, and then progressively building the amount of weight, one set after the next, up to the top. So in other words, it's sort of, if you think of it as a triangle, you're beginning at the, down here, at the warm-up set. The next set is sort of up higher in weight. The next set is up higher and up higher until you get to the top. And then if you want to do a full pyramid, you go back the opposite way. You lower the weight, lower it a little more, lower it a little more.
Ideally, the best way to train a muscle is along a direct line, starting at the point of origin and going to the point of insertion. Not all muscles can be trained this way, however. Some muscles absolutely have to be trained from different angles. Take the legs and the back, for instance. They aren't one muscle group each, but are composed of several different muscles, all working in cooperation and each having a slightly different function.
Doing leg presses with your feet out front or toes out to the side changes which leg muscles are primarily involved in the movement. Doing wide grip or close grip rowing exercises likewise involves different back muscles to a greater or lesser degree. The pectoral muscles have a single point of attachment under the delts, but multiple points of origin. So it's necessary to do flat incline and decline exercises to achieve full pectoral development. When you train the upper back, different movements involve the lats, rhomboids, the traps, and the rear delts to differing degrees, so a great many different exercises are needed to work on each of those areas fully. Some muscle groups are much simpler, such as triceps and biceps. Bodybuilders do a variety of different exercises for these muscles, but the reasoning here is less to achieve a fuller development than it is to confuse the muscles, make them do unfamiliar movements, to achieve a greater intensity of response.
Supersets are when you train 2 exercises in a row without rest. Trisets are when you train 3 exercises in a row without rest. Giant sets are more than 3 exercises in a row without rest. Their advantages to training this way is that you can increase the intensity without increasing the duration or the weight. And say you're doing a superset, you want to combine, like for one muscle group, you do say flies and bench press together. You overtax the muscle without doing an extra amount of weight by doing 2 movements for one muscle group. If you wanted to train a superset for 2 muscle groups, you might want to do like a barbell curl and a tricep push down. You can increase the intensity again without increasing the weight or the duration.
I love supersetting, especially pre-contest. It's fast, you know, it's intense, and what happens is it's a different way of, instead of giving the body rest, you move between 2 exercises. Let's say, for example, if you're doing curls for the biceps. You might do straight bar curls, and then immediately when you're done with the straight bar curl, you'll pick up the dumbbells and then go and do 10 repetitions with the dumbbells. But you have to make sure that the weight is something that you can control, still having good form, and being able to do somewhere between 10 and 12 repetitions per exercise. It's a great principle.
Supersets I do use right before competition, probably the 4 weeks before a contest, and I'm doing that constantly the 4 weeks. Supersetting opposing body parts.
The isotension principle creates the ultimate in muscle control. You do this by flexing the muscle when you aren't training it, posing and flexing between sets in the gym, or in posing sessions in which you flex your muscles at peak tension for 3 to 6 seconds at a time to bring out maximum definition and separation.
The isotension principle, what I'm trying to get you guys to understand is that you need to flex the muscle. You need to squeeze the muscle every time after your sets, for example. If you're preparing for a competition, the same thing. You want to pump all the glycogen back into the system, okay? By flexing after each set, holding that pump, you strengthen the muscle, you harden the muscle. It gives you that fine, polished look, especially during your competition preparation period. So get that in mind. Isotension movements, it really works, and that's what you need.
One of the most basic principles overall in bodybuilding training is to feel the muscle throughout the entire range of motion on the exercises, and to concentrate on the feel of the muscle and not on the weight. If you're really concentrating on the feel of the muscle, you'll always know when the exercises are effective. And you'll also know when you're cheating yourself and when you're not making the exercises as effective as they can be.
One of the most misunderstood aspects of bodybuilding training is how precise and controlled the exercises need to be. This takes total concentration, keeping the mind in the muscle at all times. Think about the muscle, not the weight. You should be totally aware of how the muscle feels at all times. Keeping the mind in the muscle is the philosophy behind a great many of the Weider training principles. Continuous tension, feeling the resistance throughout the entire range of motion. Peak contraction, experiencing a full contraction of the muscle at the top of each rep. Full range of motion, consciously working the muscles involved from full extension to full contraction and back again. To be effective, each bodybuilding movement should be done as precisely as any other sports technique. Bodybuilding is ultimately about muscle control, and there's no place in the gym for people who simply want to throw weights around.
When you've been training as long as I have, you learn to concentrate and you learn to train for feel. You instinctively know what's right and what's wrong. Usually with beginners, this isn't the case because you haven't learned to train for feel.
For a beginner, what generally feels right will be whatever kind of workout you're already used to. For example, many athletes coming to bodybuilding from other sports like to feel athletic in the gym, training too fast, too aerobically, going too much for a pump, and therefore not building muscle effectively. Weightlifters and other power athletes, on the other hand, often err in the opposite direction, training too heavy and slow with too few isolation quality exercises in their training programs.
If you keep your concentration and put your mind in the muscle, you'll get better and better at instinctively knowing what's best for you. However, this is not an absolute guide. Every athlete can benefit from additional coaching and guidance. Bodybuilders who are really in tune with their body should know when they're not getting the right feeling and seek additional guidance from a qualified source.
So when you're doing individual muscle groups, they have to be strict. They gotta be from beginning to end total contraction, and your mind has to be focused into the movement of the muscle.
Bodybuilders and powerlifters get out of their workouts what they put into it. Bodybuilders don't need to be doing 3, 2, or 1 rep sets. Instead, use a variety of Weider training principles to increase the intensity of stimulus to the weaker body parts. Finally, don't overtrain weak areas. Training longer and harder will not necessarily give you the development you need. Weak points need lots of rest and recuperation. So, aim at training weak points more efficiently rather than just training them harder.
Now that my champions has shown you how to use the Weider principles, be patient. There's about 30 different principles that form the basis of the Weider system and the basis for your success in bodybuilding. Be patient, study them, apply them. You are going to achieve exactly what you want through the use of these principles. In tape 10, we'll deal with the finishing touches and how to use belts, straps, and other training aids, stretching as well as warming up, the basis of sports medicine, everything you need to know to train safe and to train smart.
Give yourself a year. Don't give yourself 3 weeks. Don't give yourself a month. Give yourself a year and find time, whether it's waking up early or coming in the gym after work. You know, you can do it. There's enough hours in the day, and it's all about just being dedicated. So I recommend that you get up off your butt and get in the gym.
I know that I look good and I'm in shape and that I'm in control of the situation. And you can feel that way too. You just got to get to the gym.
Whether you're 12 years old or you're 80 years old, your health is going to improve, your appearance is going to improve, you're going to feel better about yourself.
If you want to look like this, you can look like this. It takes years and years and years. But I guarantee in 3 months, pick up some weights and you'll see a definite change in your body.
Don't monitor your progress based on the people you're around or the pictures you see in the magazines. Monitor your progress based on your commitment to your diet, your commitment to your working out, your intensity levels, and what you see in the mirror.
There's no other exercise or anything out on the market that you can compensate and get the same look that you'll achieve in the gym by lifting weights. It just won't happen.
I don't think there's any better time to do it than to do it right now. Opportunity is knocking, and procrastination is the great thief of opportunity. You can take that to the bank.
In building your muscles, you have to stress them. But you have to stress them successfully so that you don't create any injuries and hold back your training. That's why it's important for you to pay careful attention to what my champions tell you.
In reference to training aids, it's very important what type of clothing you're wearing, and that depends on the type of training you're doing and also the temperature of the room. If it's very hot, you may want to wear looser fitting clothing. You don't want to sweat too much if you don't want to lose too much body weight. Another problem is if the room is very, very cold and you want to keep your body warm, you may want to layer clothing, one layer on top of the other. The inner layer would be used to sort of wick the sweat away. You see, you get cold and chilled when you get fluid on top of the skin and cold air comes and rushes underneath. So by layering clothing, you wick the cold water away from the body and it's absorbed into the various layers of clothing. The inside you may want to be a cotton to help wick away the cold water. The type of clothing that someone would wear when they're training, it also depends on the type of exercises or the body parts that they happen to be training. If you're training your upper body, it's important that you have the clothing loose enough so that you're getting the appropriate and full range of motion. You don't want your clothing to restrict the range of motion. This could contribute towards a potential injury or a muscle tear. You want to have control over your body and not endure any restrictions. If you're going to be training your lower body, the type of clothing you're wearing is also very important. Some athletes tend to wear very, very tight lower garments when they're training, for instance, doing squats or leg extensions and so on. This may restrict the proper biomechanics of your training techniques. You want to be in control of the biomechanics of your movements and not have your clothing or outer garments restrict the particular biomechanics of the motion that you're going through. In terms of the type of shoes someone should wear for the proper stability and balance in training, if they're going to do weight training, they want to have a pretty solid, strong sole. If they're going to be doing endurance training, where they're going to be running and there will be a large amount of ballistic forces, force vectors, as their foot plants on the ground, it's very important that they have a shoe that will absorb a lot of those shock vectors. If you're going to be doing long-distance endurance training where you're having these ballistic force vectors, you maybe want to have a little more width on the shoe as well as thickness in the sole to absorb the shock vectors. If you're going to be doing straight lifting, you want the base of the shoe to be a little bit more stable and harder. You don't want it to be loose to where it can sort of swivel side to side. This can contribute to an inversion or eversion injury of the ankle. Now realize when your ankle bends over, so will your knee. And that's how these knee injuries occur. You keep an unstable base in the lower foot, and that will translate right up to the kneecap and right up to the pelvis, and then to the low back. And this is how injuries come about. A weight belt basically supports your low back. And the reason people use it is low back pain and low back injury. And low back weakness is probably one of the most common injuries we see in weight training athletes, as well as the general population.
I use the belt when I train, especially doing heavy squats or bent over rows for the back. I think that's very important to give you that support. And then in some exercises, it may be a little bit restricting, like doing cable rows. So I don't use it until I know that it's not something I can control and I'll worry about it.
Now the reason for the weight belt is what you're doing is you're adding additional stability to what we call the core of the body. The core is your torso. One of the things athletes have to remember is the core, your abdominis rectus, your erector spinae, all the muscles that surround your body are called your core. That is where the stable power in your body lies. So what you do with the weight belt is that you're actually adding an additional layer of power and strength to that core.
I wear a weight belt while training just about at every exercise. I do it because it gives me more of a feeling of stability because I'm not allowing all the pressure on my lower back. Using a weight belt, it kind of restricts all that pressure from just bursting onto that one area because you're using your abdominal muscles to push against the weight belt and you're keeping your spine in line.
However, it is better to train without a weight belt unless you actually need it. Because when you use a weight belt, you're supporting the muscles and they are not being trained during that exercise. What also occurs is you're now changing the biomechanics of your body slightly. And now when you train without a weight belt, you're not accessing that additional stability, and the curvature in your spine and stability in the pelvis is slightly different. You may not be ready for this, and then injury can occur due to that lack of stability you're used to having when you have the weight belt. You should consider wearing a weight belt when you're doing stiff leg deadlifts to take some of the pressure off the low back and stabilize it. You may consider using a weight belt when you're doing squats in order to stabilize a low back, especially if you have a weak low back area.
Well, of course, in heavy squats, deadlifts, or even in heavy curls and presses, I use a training belt. And I like the training belt that goes around, that is soft on the side, and you make it tight when you're doing the set. Then when you're done, you loosen it, you breathe deep, tighten it to the next set. So that's a very important part.
You may want to consider using wrist straps if you do have a weakness in the wrist, but it is important to still train your wrist. But with certain motions, you may begin to experience pain in the wrist. And sometimes wrist straps can help to stabilize the wrist joint and prevent further injury. Anytime you have an instability in the joint or you have a previous injury and you want to prevent an acute or minor injury from turning into a chronic one, you may want to support it with some type of strap. For instance, wrist straps are used to help stabilize the wrist, especially in motions when you're going into what we call hyperextension, where the wrist bends backward. This can occur in a bench press, in an overhead press, whether you're using a straight bar or dumbbells.
Only basic training aid that I use is usually straps. On occasion, I'll wear a weightlifting belt, but straps primarily because I have a very weak grip. And on pulling exercises and curling exercises, that has a tendency to take the emphasis off of my wrists and off of my hands.
I use wraps because my grip isn't as strong sometimes. And you get to those last couple of repetitions in a set, and it really does assist you. And, you know, it's like an extra, it's like a cheat. So it helps. You need that sometimes.
is one of the most commonly injured joints in the body. And with knee wraps, you tend to give some additional stability. You have cartilage and ligaments within the knee joint, and it's very important to protect them and prevent injury. Once you get even a slight injury in the knee, you are more set up for more advanced injury in the knee. One of the most common exercises knee wraps are employed in is in the squat. Next to the knee, the elbow is probably one of the most commonly injured joints in the body. And the reason being is people may tend to extend too quickly or too hard or use too much weight in a fast, jerky type of motion. This causes the elbow joint to snap to its full open position and may cause some tendonitis in that joint, as well as some calcium deposits or tendon injury. One of the most common exercises or series of exercises elbow wraps are used for is any type of motion where you're going through flexion and extension. This can be curls, bench press, overhead press. Any type of motion that will open and close this joint will tend to contribute to injury in that joint. And thereby, wraps are many times used to help stabilize this joint when it becomes weakened.
Many bodybuilders like to train wearing workout gloves. There are two basic advantages to this. For one, gloves protect the hands. Working with heavy knurled bars day in and day out can really tear up the skin of the hands and fingers. If your hands get too sore, it's very difficult to concentrate on getting the most out of your workouts. But another, and even more important reason, is that gloves allow you to get a better grip. Pieces of iron like dumbbells, barbells, or chinning bars can be very slippery, especially when your hands are sweating. And the better your grip, the more intensely and safely you can train. One of the worst mistakes a bodybuilder can make is training too heavy. When you try to work with too much weight, it's impossible to do the exercises correctly or effectively. You may be training hard, but you won't get the kind of results you expect. Not only that, but subjecting your muscles to weights they aren't prepared to handle substantially increases your risk of training injury.
I'm not interested in trying to impress other people in the gym by training with very heavy weight or weight that I really cannot control.
I don't go in the gym throwing heavy weights around. You see a lot of guys, they go in the gym, they just start piling weights on the bar, they're grunting, they're groaning, and they're banging out reps with whatever they're doing. I don't do that. Weight doesn't impress me. I go in the gym to improve my physique. So I always use a weight that I can handle. If what's heavy for me is light for somebody else, so be it. But as long as I am getting the feeling out of it, I know I'm at my limit, and I don't push it past that limit.
I start with a lighter weight and do a few high rep sets and make sure the muscle is warmed up properly. And also seems to make me, getting that blood flow seems to make me stronger. So when I do go up in weight, it's a lot easier for me.
When you go into a gymnasium, it will be a very great temptation to lift as much weight as the other fellow or the other lady with whom you're working out. Remember, it's extremely important to lift weights relative to your own strength levels, not to try to prove yourself in a gymnasium in the sense that you're stronger than the next fellow. The important part here is that you use proper form and work to get the burn that you can achieve given your own strength levels. If you do that, you'll have a much better chance of staying around the gymnasium for a lot longer as the years pass and building the sort of body you want to build.
The person who's not familiar with body balance or coordination is often the person who first picks a weight up. I remember the very first time I lifted weights when I was about 10 or 11 years old. What do we all do? We overtrain. We injure the muscle, we create too much mass too quick, and the next day we can't even comb our hair, right?
Some athletes say, well, I'm just not putting on the muscle size. How often are you training? 3 hours a day. How many days a week? 7 days a week. They're not allowing their body the rest time it needs for that muscle tissue to grow back together stronger. They're in a constant state of breakdown, a constant state of catabolism. They're not allowing the body to rejuvenate itself. They need to ease back. If they're training very intensely with weights, they really can't train more than an hour or so with the proper type of training techniques. the muscles will exhaust themselves. They just won't be able to keep going, and they will end up in this constant breakdown phase, not allowing for proper growth.
It's great to be enthusiastic, especially for the younger bodybuilders. It's great to get in the gym, be enthusiastic, and then only do what your mind and your body can handle. Don't do more.
Beginners have one thing in common. They all are very enthusiastic, and they go in like a ball of fire, and they want to do everything all at once, as much weight as they can. They see other people, and they want to be right there, right then.
It takes years to reshape your body and to form it into a good muscular body. In fact, you really don't reach maturity until you're about 27, 28 years old.
The muscle and joint systems may become weakened from this constant overtraining. Tendinitis, tears to the muscle and tissue can also occur from this constant bombardment of stimuli without allowing the downtime for the muscle tissue to rejuvenate and go through the proper growth phases.
Warming up before you train is an important factor in getting the most out of your workouts. Light pre-workout exercise literally warms up the muscles involved, as well as the associated tendons, ligaments, and joints, raises their internal temperature so that they are much better prepared to deal with the stress of heavy training. And this kind of warm-up activity also brings additional blood supply to the areas involved, so that your muscles will have all the nutrients and oxygen they need to support the intense contractions of serious bodybuilding training.
One particular warm-up is general warm-up. It means that you increase the overall level of body temperature. This can be done in a variety of ways. You can ride a stationary bike if you like. You might also choose to run, or indeed you might engage in vigorous aerobic activity before coming into the gymnasium. This is particularly important if you live in a cold climate and you're going to take a workout coming directly from the cold into the gymnasium.
You see people come into the gym all the time and they'll immediately throw themselves into a weight workout with no warm-up whatsoever. So the logic is not there. So what we need to do is warm up the muscle and the tendons enough so that we can go into the workout and begin working in with lighter weights and progressively add resistance, progressive resistance, until that resistance grows greater and the muscles are worked efficiently.
Bodybuilders most often warm up simply by doing light repetitions of the exercises they plan to do in that day's workout. For example, a set or two of light benches, rows, or squats performed before loading up the bar for serious training. The advantage of this is that the warm-up becomes very specific. The specific muscles, tendons, joints, and ligaments involved in the exercises are prepared to perform very specific movements and deal with specific types and angles of stress. Therefore, when bodybuilders explain that they do, say, 5 sets of barbell shoulder presses as part of their delt workout, if this is one of the first exercises they're doing for that particular body part, they may actually do 6, 7, or even 8 sets total. Those first sets are done as warm-up sets with very little weight. The bodybuilders don't count these warm-up sets as part of their overall set total, but they are very important nonetheless. Warm-up sets allow you to work through a full range of motion, to stretch as well as warm up the muscles, tendons, joints, and ligaments involved, and to concentrate on form, to find the groove of the exercise, so that each movement is performed and executed as effectively as possible.
If you go in the gym thinking that you can lift the world, that's one thing, but if you don't use a safe approach, warm up thoroughly, stretch properly, and progressively add weight to each set, then you're inviting injury to set in. So I train very cautiously because I know that it could all end tomorrow with a torn bicep or torn pec.
Many bodybuilders go through a program of stretching as part of their pre-workout warm-up, especially before a lower body workout. Muscles like the quadriceps and the hamstrings are extremely powerful, and it's easy for them to become tight between workouts. Taking time to stretch these muscles before a workout not only increases the effectiveness of your training, but it also can substantially reduce your chances of incurring a training injury. They also frequently stretch the muscles involved in a workout between sets. For example, grasping the ankle and bending the leg back to stretch the quads, or pulling against something to stretch and extend the lat muscles of the back. Most bodybuilders increase upper body flexibility by doing light sets of an exercise and deliberately working through as long a range of motion as possible, holding momentarily at the position of full contraction and again at full extension. Stretching movement should be done smoothly and gently because any jerking motion sets off what is called the stretch reflex, a mechanism in the body that causes the muscles to contract against your attempts to stretch them as a way of protecting themselves from being overstretched. Avoid this by stretching slowly, smoothly, and giving the muscle time to relax and respond.
I'm a big believer in stretching. I think that's very important. Beginning of my workout, I stretch. I don't stretch a lot to the extreme. I just, stretch a little, warm up. I'll even warm up with a bar. What stretching also does for me is it's giving me more separation in the muscle when I stretch, and no injuries. So I really believe in stretching. I think it's an important part of weight training.
There are a lot of approaches to stretching. Some people like to partner stretch where they have somebody pushing them forward. This can be quite dangerous because you may have a tendency to go beyond the joint ranges of motion and tear tissue, muscle, and even joint and ligament. Very, very dangerous to do this. Important with stretching to go through that range of motion slow and easy without that bouncing or leaning forward type of maneuver.
In order to do your training in the most effective and intense manner possible, it's important to be sure you stay properly grounded, that is, balanced in a secure, stable position before doing the movement. To correctly perform any exercise, you should first assume the appropriate stance. You should be stabilized, positioned securely and on balance so that you can handle heavy weights in the groove and give full concentration to the execution of the movement. Look around next time you're in the gym. See how many individuals are off balance when they do their sets, how awkward and unstable they look when performing certain exercises. This need for stability is why a lot of exercise machines use belts to hold you securely in place while doing a movement. This allows you to concentrate fully on the muscles being trained rather than on trying to maintain your balance.
All weight training, however, boils down to one basic principle. If you don't have proper balance, you create injury. Therefore, when we're looking at the weight trainer, the bodybuilder, if you will, but the athlete, the person who's competing every day, the baseball player, the football player, soccer player, rugby player, you name it, you have to have proper posture. And correct posture starts with the feet. And if you don't stabilize your posture from below your knees, you're going to be compensating for foot instability. That foot instability creates further back problems and further neck problems. So again, proper weight training, specifically for the beginner, starts with proper organization of posture, proper movement. Take your shoes and socks off. Look at your feet. If your arches are flat, if your arches roll in, that's called pronation. If your feet roll out, that's called supination. If you flare one foot out, that's called external rotation. We want proper and efficient balance in everything. And if you start the beginner off properly, if he's even 15 years old, 18 years old, or 12 years old, the point is to start with balance. Weight training should start comfortably and efficiently. You should not have a lot of joint soreness. You should start it off repetitively enough, however, that you feel like you're working your body and you feel good about it.
There are two aspects of body posture which are very important also to the notion of preventing body injury. The first of these has to do with the particular stance. When you plant your feet, plant them in a way that's solid from the ground all the way up. And in fact, concentrate in tensing your body from the ground up as you pick up your weight. The second point is that when you're lifting your weight, there should be a basic balance between the way in which the body is moved from the front to the back. So if you're doing a cheek curl, for example, too much sway will shift the arc of balance in such a way that it makes you vulnerable to back injury. So balance in the sense of moderation in respect of any particular movement is a key factor in preventing injury. And it's important to bear that in mind whenever you exercise.
Proper biomechanics of lifting and training are very important. We must pay attention to the biomechanics of the head positioning, first of all, because the head is the center of balance in the body, and as you move your head, it changes the biomechanics of the entire spine, pelvis, and so on. One of the other problems with training is that people must pay attention to their joint structure function. They have a tendency to go beyond what is normal joint range of motion. For instance, when they're doing cross-lateral flies on a bench. They should not go beyond 180 degrees when their arms are directly outstretched. Sometimes athletes have a tendency to go even much further beyond that 180-degree line, and they tear the tissue at the pec deck area. And you see a lot of athletes with stretch marks across this area from tearing the tissue. Not only because they may have grown too quickly, but because they've gone through a phase of tearing tissue, going beyond the normal physiologic ranges of motion. It is really key when you're training to have a spotter, because so many times somebody's on a bench and they have too much weight and they get stuck with the bar on their chest.
The ideal bodybuilding physique is characterized by balance and proportion, and so is the ideal bodybuilding workout. Total training means you need to work your entire body, not just your favorite muscles. Unbalanced training, working certain muscles too much and neglecting others, not only leads to the development of a disproportionate physique, it causes some muscles to overpower others, increasing the risk of training injury.
Another important point to remember if you want to avoid injury is that visualization techniques and full focus techniques are extremely important. A visualization technique means that when you come into a gym and you're doing a particular exercise, that you focus very intensely on the exercise you're doing. Perform it in a methodical and strict manner. Visualize the result you want to achieve, but keep your attention on the movement of the weight. Be sure that in doing it, that you do not go beyond the points that are safe in the range of motion of the exercise. So if you're doing a curl, for example, that you don't sway your back too intensely. That if you're doing a triceps press, that you don't allow the bar to jam down on your elbows and thereby injure the elbow area. Similarly on a squat, when you squat down, you should come to the bottom very gently, not bounce from the bottom position. Remember, the idea is not simply to go up and down, but rather to feel the exercise all the way down and all the way up. When you do that, you've got 2 reps for every one. Many bodybuilders who are just beginning will tend to throw a weight up and then let it come down as fast as they can. The important part here is to visualize the motion and tense the arms as you're coming up as well as coming down. That way you always have 2 reps for one.
100% mental focus is essential to training safely. You know, of course, the Weider system emphasizes muscular development. That's what we want. We want to make as many gains as possible. We want to put on quality muscle. But within these parameters, okay, we're going to train safely. And that starts by focusing 100% on what you're doing, putting the mind into the muscle.
If you don't feel good, if you can't concentrate on what you're doing, then there's more of a chance of injury. You know, you're not concentrating on the weight. You know, you may pull off a weight and there's another plate in front of it and you're not thinking and you pull that weight off onto your foot. So it is important to definitely be there mentally. That's when injuries usually occur.
I have to concentrate. If there's any distraction in the background, you know, people coming up to me, I have to stop and say, you know, I'm training and we'll talk later when I'm finished.
Remember that an intensive workout is a very serious business, and therefore you should treat it with the serious consideration it deserves.
There are 2 kinds of trauma, micro trauma and macro trauma. Everybody knows macro trauma. That's like getting hit by a Mack truck. You know, once you get smacked, you're down. However, micro trauma is really a cumulative mechanical stress. That's, for instance, how do you lift weights, not just the load of weights. And often, if your posture's bad, we call it pathomechanic or stress-bearing posture. You can create injuries. For instance, if all I'm doing is working my biceps instead of my triceps and my chest flexors instead of my upper back extensors, I may develop my posture into a squatting posture. And no matter how much you build or how much larger you want to get, you might actually be injuring yourself just because your posture's bad. So everything that we do in sports science is really built around one word, and that word is balance. Good coordinated physics. We want distribution of weight in the front of your body, the back of your body, the sides of each part of your body. And not only that, but obviously we want you to work your lower body as much as you do your upper body. You know, the weekend warrior, the weekend athlete often screws their body up just because they go out and they work their upper body and forget about the lower body.
I've never had injuries myself. think the reason why is because my form has been really, really strict. I started with the basics, real light, and I improved, worked up over the years. And I'm confident now mentally. I know I can, what kind of weight I can handle.
Probably the most important thing you can do while training to help prevent injuries is just train smart. The person that goes the heaviest isn't always the best bodybuilder. Doing heavy weight is important, but if you can't do the heavy weight with proper form, you're wasting your time, and most likely you will end up with an injury.
The majority of injuries take place because of sloppy exercise technique. So what we need to do is we need to look towards making the exercise as perfect as possible.
Post-exercise muscle soreness is the result of microtrauma, that is, microscopic injuries to the tissues involved. Although soreness is the result of damage, it's not really classified as injury. In fact, it's one good way of being certain your workouts have been sufficiently intense. However, when soreness becomes so acute that you can't do your next workout, it's time to back off and reduce your training intensity until your body is more fully adapted to the stresses of your workouts.
I know when to stop if I have a minor injury, because if you're in contact with your physique and you know how you should feel when you're training, then you know that this is something that's not good. You know when a pain is a good pain and when it's a bad pain. And that's why it's important to always listen to your body.
There's a big difference between post-exercise soreness and the pain of injury. Pain is a warning sign that tells you an area has been injured, that you need to avoid that activity and allow the part of the body involved to recover. You can work through soreness, but trying to work through the pain of injury is a mistake. With an injury, if you feel any pain at all during the exercise, you've gone too far. When you ignore this warning sign, you risk re-injury, more severe injury, or chronic injury.
Minor injuries are going to happen, and I think that the only way that you can circumvent them or work your way around them is by backing off. A minor injury can become a major injury so long as you continue to beat it to death. I take time off. Massages are good. Heating rubs are good. Ice packs. Things like that will take away the immediate pain, but you've also got to back off a little bit, that's all.
If you have soreness or inflammation, you should back off 10%. Now, that means if you hurt your Achilles tendon, if you hurt your tendon in your knee, your shoulder, your biceps, your neck, your back, any part of your body, if you have soreness or pain, you back off 10%. But you still do the full motion of the activity. And you do that for 3 days, by the way, for a 3-day period. If anywhere along that 3-day period you still can't do the activity without soreness or pain, you back off another 10%. But you still maintain full range of motion and activity. If it still hurts, you still have range of motion, then you back off another 10%, or a total of 30%, you stop all activity. You stop the activity and go see a doctor.
I've never been seriously injured, but I think that is possibly due to the fact that I've always been conscious of that. And I have always taken time to warm up properly and to ice down joints and such that were swollen or painful. And also I've been very, very careful to listen to my body using the instinctive principle and backing off if I feel that there is a potential injury in sight.
Everything's internal about my feel, what's going on inside of my body. If I'm pulling something a little too far, I know it.
An acute injury can result from a trauma such as a blow or a cut, from a sudden stretching or twisting force, or from the cumulative effects of overwork. However, chronic injury is the result of long-term abuse of the body, injuries made worse over time rather than being treated and resolved. And these are not so easily dealt with. Chronic injuries are persistent long-term problems that can sometimes prevent you from ever training at your full capacity. And they should be avoided by adequately treating acute injuries whenever they occur.
Another important aspect of injury prevention is knowing when in fact you're injured. Many bodybuilders who are competitors need, unfortunately, to work past their injuries or around them. Some bodybuilders in doing this move from having simply a minor injury to a major one. If you're a beginning bodybuilder, it's particularly important that you pay attention to two aspects here. The first is that if when you're exercising you hear a pop, or in fact feel a tearing sensation, desist or cease doing the exercise immediately. Then pick up an empty bar, a bar without any weight at all, and move once again through the movement, making sure that there is no pain. If the pain persists, don't do any exercise for at least 48 hours. Come back in 48 hours and try again with simply an empty bar. If, when you're working with the empty bar, you do not feel pain, then you can gradually increase the weight on the bar. Go up by 5 pounds on each side. If, as you're working towards your normal limit, and you're feeling no pain whatsoever, then you're pretty safe. On the other hand, if you find that you're in a situation where you are having problems and pain does persist, you should cease exercise or exercise with a weight that is not giving you pain. If you follow those 2 simple rules, you'll be much better prepared to work out without injury.
You have to be very careful not to get injuries, because injuries become permanent if you keep injuring yourself. When you do get an injury, you should immediately stop and then have it analyzed what the injury is before you continue on.
If you hear a crack or a snap, or you hear something or feel something actually tear, immobilize that joint and get to the proper medical care immediately.
Some injuries, when you rip a ligament, for example, makes a noise. That noise, you have to pay attention. If it has a pop, then you know, they're going to check by the doctor. 2, even if it's a muscle injury, if it swells, immediately you have to go to the doctor, because that could be something very serious. 3, if it's some kind of jamming in the joints itself, then you have to really check it, and also check it with the doctor. And one of the problems I found in bodybuilding is the bodybuilders got so strong and so resistant to pain that accidentally I took x-rays on their lumbar and I saw fractures. And I said, wait a minute, you have a fracture in the lumbar. How did you get this? Oh, my back's been sore for months. I don't know.
One of the basic principles, if an injury happens to occur, is RICE, R-I-C-E. R stands for rest, immediately rest the injury. I stands for ice. And a good way of icing it down is to just take some water, put it in a styrofoam cup, and leave that in the freezer. Then if you get an injury, you just go into the freezer, pull out the styrofoam cup, pull off the top of it, and now you have a nice styrofoam holder to rub along that muscle belly. Now when you're icing that muscle group, you want to go along the muscle fibers. Icing will tend to decrease inflammation and decrease the swelling in the muscle. So we have rest, ice, compression. We compress down, push down on that body part that's been injured. And finally, elevation. We elevate or lift up that body part. Say, for instance, we damaged our ankle. We keep our ankle higher than the rest of our body. It tends to decrease the swelling and decrease the amount of fluid accumulation that would deposit in that joint immediately following injury.
When you get an injury of any kind, the first thing to do is put ice on it. No heat. It must be ice. This is a complete rule. And a lot of people put the heat, then inflames it more.
Immediately following an injury, I would recommend putting an ice pack on the injury to reduce the swelling and the damage that it will do to the tissues.
We want to compress to get the swelling out. We want to rest it, obviously, not to re-injure it. You want to ice it to cool it down and contract the tissue, and you want to elevate it to, again, get any swelling out of it. So compression is a support mechanism, whether it's a taping procedure or whether an elastic strap or just supporting it with a towel to keep it nice and tight. But remember, elevating it above the heart is probably one of the more important ideas. Whether you're on your back or you're on your stomach, you want to try to raise the part up enough to get good circulation going.
In reference to compression, you want to put mild pressure, but not so hard that you're restricting blood flow. Some people have a tendency with a bad injury to tie it so tightly that they end up with a lot of pain in that joint due to that heavy-duty compression.
Rest, ice, compress, and elevate. Now, if an injury over the first 72 hours is still sore, it's still swollen, it's time now to do what's called contrast therapy. And that means that you use ice on it first, maybe 15, 20 minutes, depending on degree of severity. And then you should use hot, moist heat. And that's whether it's a hot shower or a hot bath. We usually recommend, by the way, using a hot bath with Epsom salts. I like the magnesium sulfate, draws the soreness out of the tissue, but it's contrast therapy. Ice constricts, the heat dilates, draws fresh oxygenated blood in, and you can duplicate the process. You could do 10 minutes of ice, 10 minutes of the moist heat, and repeat it immediately. 10 and 10 again. But again, you want to compress and we want to elevate. Get the swelling out of the tissue as quickly as possible. If you do not have full range of motion, we do not recommend you in trying to stretch through full range of motion. We think that you should do contrast therapy, get the muscle tissue to relax, and then in the progressive stages of rehabilitation, work the joint and muscle out comfortably, the tendon or ligament out comfortably to make sure that you're not overstretching or over-traumatizing it either.
Now remember, in an acute injury that happens very quickly to you, you want to rest, and you want to give yourself sufficient rest to where that injury or that weakness that you've experienced is not going to turn from an acute, rapid injury to a long-term chronic one. So give yourself enough rest. With the ice, it's important to use a lot of ice, but don't leave it on the skin so long where it starts to sunburn the skin or cause frostbite on the skin. You may want to put a towel in between the ice cubes and your skin. You may want to put some type of covering on the skin before you place the ice on it. Or you can take ice, put it in a towel, wrap it up, and rest it on that body part.
The purpose for taping or supporting a joint is for protection. Often if you have injury, if you have edema, fluid, swelling, any of those reasons for, quote, pain syndromes, if you have pain in the joint, you want to protect the joint. And taping is really one of the safest ways to do that. So when you go ahead and stand up, you're going to find out that the tape works like a big spring to protect the knee. Go ahead and stand up right here. See how it bounces?
Yeah, it does. It doesn't come loose either.
Brand new ligaments and muscles.
Forms.
So it supports you, yet it gives you, and it actually gives you some elasticity to the movement. Massage therapy is actually physically, manually manipulating muscle, ligament, and tendons mechanically. In other words, the therapist is doing it themselves to the patient. One of the greatest benefits is real simple, just increase circulation. The manual person, the doctor, the therapist, whoever's doing the massage therapy themselves, can get into ligament, muscle, tendon, try to stretch out those tight spots, which no matter what kind of therapy you seem to do or what kind of stretching you seem to do, you never quite can get it. And this is where the subjectivity of the patient talking and explaining to the therapist where they feel it is the most important. But the greatest benefit for general massage overall is just, again, simple increased oxygenation of tissue. Home massage can be a wonderful thing if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, you may be creating further and greater injury. For instance, if you have a contusion, hematoma, some swelling in the tissue, and you try to massage it out, you might be goofing up and massaging it in and creating further micro tears to the muscle fiber. You should simply be careful, not overdo it. In fact, if you can't rest it, ice it, compress it, and elevate it, you really need to see a specialist. Go to your family doctor.
The best thing I can say is to, slow down and learn the techniques of how to live properly right from the beginning so that you don't develop bad habits. Right from the onset, you can develop really good training habits and have a long, healthy, prosperous career in training and lifting weights and conditioning.
So when you're young, you get these injuries and you work on, and you have them all the time. You've got to let them rest and heal.
So hopefully what you can do at home is simply look at the literature, understand the proper movements, don't do too much. It's better in the beginning to do enough stretching, warming up, warming down before and after you lift weights, and making sure that the joints are warmed up efficiently before you train.
This trophy represents the dream of every bodybuilder. And every bodybuilder who has won this trophy in a Joe Weider Miss Olympia event proves to the world that he is the best bodybuilder of the year. The exact identical techniques and principles that these champions use to develop their body to win this trophy is in your hands now. It is up to you to apply yourself, put these techniques into action, put guts behind them, work them hard, and you too will develop a body you can be proud of.
The shape, the full deltoids, the pecs, the abs, I want it all. I want the thighs, I want the calves, I want the tight glutes. You give me a man who's tight and fit and firm and hard, and you've got probably Adonis. But it's attainable, and I think every man would probably want that for himself. I know every woman would want it for herself.
The future of bodybuilding is very exciting because now people of all ages are now involved in resistance and weight training. 60 years old is not old anymore. We have people in their 70s and 80 years old who look like they're 30.
Physical fitness, I mean, it not only makes you strong physically, but it makes you strong mentally.
Outside the gym, you take that same philosophy with you, and whether it's in schoolwork or it's in business or it's in relationships, you realize that there are no limits, and you get from it what you put into it.
Get off your big butt. Get into the gym.